Hi, Max.
Hi George, how are you? So do we do that like they do in pilot thing? You have control. So I have control. Thank you so much for your patience, everybody. We've only. Oh look!
Can we get that
Yeah.
on a loop?
That is on a loop. Yeah, yeah.
Excellent.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for your patience. It's made it more entertaining, I'm sure. So I'm from Mitsubishi Electric, Max Halliwell, Communications Manager. George Clarke, if you don't know him already, TV presenter, architect, thought provoker, and also our brand ambassador for Ecodan air source heat pumps. So we'll start off with a bit of light conversation. So George, was it earlier this year or last year, had a heat pump fitted to his house, ripped out all his gas boiler. Tell us about that.
It's basically, I think like everybody, I'm just trying to live a slightly greener life, really. And I was feeling guilty, genuinely feeling really guilty about the cars I drove and the energy I consumed. And I was like, and it kind of annoyed me a little bit that there was lots of things I couldn't do to my house because of planning. There's loads of issues. In the area where I live, you can't have solar panels, you can't have wind turbines, you can't have any of that stuff. I'd already refurbished the house to quite a high eco standard in terms of insulation, because if I'm really honest, I really believe that being ecological through the fabric of the building is the right place to start. It's daft to put in lovely technology if you haven't insulated properly and stuff like that, which is really obvious. So I'd insulated a lot, and I'd put triple glazed windows in as well, done all of that. And then I just had this boiler, if I'm really honest. And you think of all the great stuff that I've got in the house and some of the tech and things like that, and then you'd open the boiler cupboard and there's this thing just burning away. And I just thought, it's just not right, to be honest with you. And that's when we got talking and installed the air source heat pump, which, I'm obviously Mitsubishi's brand ambassador, right? And I know you're going to sit there and go, yeah, he's being paid to say all this, but we might as well get it out there. I've got a number of brand ambassador deals, and I only do it with companies that I really love and with products that I really believe in. And I'm not just saying that. That's important for my own credibility and my own authority and my own moral compass, I think, to be honest with you. And it's brilliant. It really is a fantastic bit of kit. And even though I knew a fair bit about them, can you remember we sat and had that first chat about it? And I knew a fair bit, but I still couldn't quite get my head around it. And I was like, how can you take heat from the air outside in England, and heat your hot water with it? I just thought it was mad. And but when you get into the technology of it and you realise, and in some ways how simple it is, because it's technology that's already out there. It does the reverse of what your fridge does. So your fridge is basically, producing a massive reduced temperature. With the air source heat pump, it's compressing the air. It's taking the small amount of heat in the air and compressing it, really, really squeezing it to make that heat really, really intense, and that becomes a heating element that then heats the air. And it's that simple, really. And it just feels, to me, it feels clean tech. Obviously, I use electricity to power the Ecodan unit, and then you get into all conversations about where that comes from and where that energy comes from. So I'm with a renewable energy supplier. And it is all part of the eco debate, isn't it? I now drive a fully electric car, a Jaguar I-Pace, which I have to say is one of the most amazing cars I've ever driven in my life. It's a beautiful thing, and I actually feel good when I drive it, not just because of the lack of fumes coming out the back of the car, but it's also unbelievably quiet. And I kind of think I live in West London, I think how West London would change just from a noise pollution level, never mind an air quality level. But I'll be honest with you, as soon as I got that car and I tweeted about it, I just got a barrage of abuse from people. I just got a barrage of abuse. And I was really shocked. I was like, hang on a minute, I'm trying to kind of live in an eco way, in a green way, and I get my energy from my car from Ecotricity, so I've got my little Ecotricity card, and that's all renewable energy. But the barrage of stuff that came, and the obvious one was like, oh, sorry for you, mate, you can afford it. That's an 80 grand car. And I was just like, yeah, I don't mean this in an arrogant way, but it's got to start somewhere, hasn't it? And some of that technology is going to be really expensive. And if we don't try it and invest in it, then companies aren't going to expand their businesses and do more and more R&D. I remember when my dad, I can talk for hours by the way, do you want a bar? Do you want a bar? Okay, yeah, when you get bored, just wave. I remember when my dad bought a Betamax video player in like 1983 or something. I mean, it was about 250 quid. I think the house we lived in was only about 14 grand. And, you know, it was a really expensive bit of kit. And now you can go out and buy a DVD player for 20 quid. We don't have DVD players anymore, really, do we? Because it's all kind of Netflix and all streamed and stuff like that. So, but, you know, that's just an example of, you know, my dad investing in a bit of technology that then expanded and expanded and then became more and more affordable. So I'm happy to get loads of crap and stick for trying to be ecological, if it means it's for the betterment of the environment and well, everything really. And actually the nicest thing is my kids love it all. You know, my kids are greener than me. And, like, genuinely, my daughter has gone vegan, and I said, why have you done it? She said, I want to save the planet. And I was like, whoa, she's 12 years old, you know, and there's it's not my kid's school actually, but my niece goes to a school, and it's a non-religious school, completely non-religious school. It's completely neutral, but they've decided that the only religion that they're going to have is Mother Nature. So all of their teaching is based around what Mother Nature would think and what the environment would think. So whether they're teaching maths or English or whatever it might be, they use the environment and Mother Nature as a means of being able to do that teaching. And I just think that's phenomenal, really. And I think in an age where Greta Thunberg's doing what she's doing, whether you like it or not, or Extinction Rebellion, you might not agree with the way they're doing things, but it's the whole conversation's changed massively. We were talking about quite an amazing woman who's a kind of environmental consultant, who's a sustainability specialist, and she's been in the business for about 20 odd years. And I spoke to her last week, and she just said, even I didn't see the change that's happened in the last 6 months. She said before I'd be invited to go into companies to give them ecological, sustainable advice as a little kind of sideline. It was as if it was just a little box that had to be ticked. You know, a little bit of corporate responsibility. You know, tick that box. We've done a bit of eco. You know, we recycled the paper. She said now companies are pulling her in saying, we need you because, you know, we could be out of business in 10 years' time if we don't fundamentally change how we do things. And I think that's quite exciting, actually. I think that's a really, really, really exciting time. And I do believe in innovation and fantastic R&D, and I do believe in great science and that being applied to the design of beautiful products. I'm not necessarily an eco-warrior who wants to live in a straw bale hut and, you know, live in the middle of a field on my own. Do you know what I mean? It's not the way that I see ecological design. So I think it's a really, really, really exciting time. I know there's a lot of doom and gloom around at the minute, but that's the politicians' fault. I think we should just keep cracking on.
Thank you, George. So before we get on to it, I've got a couple of questions from, this guy, if you think you're busy, this guy's diary is incredible, and a piece of technology that we have with our system came in really useful. So when you got your Jag, do you remember, I came to your house while the install was being done, and I saw this brand new full electric, first one I'd seen, this I-Pace being lifted up into the air. Do you remember? You were illegally parked. And I said, George, grey I-Pace? Oh yeah, I'm too busy. Anyway. But anyway, one of the things we had to do later on, the commissioning engineers left, good job, but there's a couple of things we wanted to change, and then trying to get back with George was like, oh yeah, you can see me March 2021 if you like, you're that busy. But fortunately, we've got a system remotely that we're able to make the changes that George's family needed without making a visit, so low carbon.
Yeah, but I mean, obviously he has full access to everything that goes on with my Ecodan system in the house, but what's quite worrying, what's really, really worrying, and this he wouldn't do this with yours, don't worry, he's not allowed to do it. I have given him authorization to be able to do it. And he just said to me the other day, I've just made a couple of tweaks. You know, you might feel the water might be a little bit warmer, your heating system might just be a little bit cooler. It was brilliant. I was like, oh, thanks very much, mate. I don't even have to do that.
Excellent. Right, okay, let's get on to... so one of the main questions... I gave a presentation this morning about... I think a few of you were here. and it was all about the impact heat pumps can have on the UK housing stock. So we're in this climate emergency, everyone agrees with that. And we, as a manufacturer, deal with a lot of construction companies. 2016, we as a country were supposed to be building net zero homes, zero carbon. We are so far away from that. And I asked a couple of questions on LinkedIn saying, what questions would you like thoughts from George on? And the big one that kept coming out was low carbon sustainable construction and affordability. Now you've written quite a lot on our blogs. George writes for us on something called The Hub. Just Google Mitsubishi Electric Hub. George writes monthly for us. So just want to get your thoughts on this whole argument that's put forward that low carbon is expensive in construction.
Well, it's a tricky one to answer quickly, if I'm honest, but I'll give it my best shot. Improved building standards and improved ecological standards will cost more money. Fact. Sorry. Thank you. I wouldn't have been able to do Terry Wogan's job, would I? Higher building standards and higher ecological standards will raise the capital cost of any build. Simple as that. That is an absolute fact. Yeah. And if you look at what the mass house building market are building at the minute, it's pretty low in the pecking order when it comes to sustainability. Now they are building, in effect, to, I wouldn't quite say current building regs, but not far off. And there's a lot of, when government thinks about raising standards, the threat from the mass house building industry is that you're going to push up house prices. And there's no housing minister in Britain, and we have many of them, by the way. It's like a revolving door. They just don't want to be responsible for that. But we need to make that change. We need to make it happen. Now, what you've got to do is obviously, and you'll all know this, you've got to take a long-term view with any sustainable investment that you make. Simple as that. And as we know, there's a lot of house builders out there who have got a very short-term view. They just want to build something and sell it and move on. It's not all of them, in fairness. So I'm generalising a little bit. There are some great house builders who take a long-term view, but they're few and far between. And if you take a long-term view on a home, which we should, because if we're going to build a decent quality home, it should be around for at least 150 years, really, then the stuff that we put in it should be thought about as being priced over a 150-year period. And we just don't look at it like that. The industry just doesn't look at it like that. I mean, housing associations do, in fairness. Councils are starting to do it, because councils are starting to build again, because the borrowing cap's been lifted, although they're not building that much because of right to buy, because they're not going to build houses that are going to be sold off at a massive discount. But some housing associations take a fantastic long-term view. I think any self-builders take a long-term view. I think community land trusts and cooperatives, they all take a long-term view as well, because they're building homes for themselves that they're going to live in. And it's been proven time and time again that self-builders build to a higher standard than the commercial industry does, because you are happy to invest more in your home. Simple as that. You're not doing it to make necessarily a quick profit, and you're happy to invest more. And so what we have to do on a large scale is take a long-term view. And my humble view, and I'm not an economist, but if the entire industry raised its standards and therefore raised its build costs, what should happen, I'm not saying it would, but what should happen is that land prices should drop a little bit to account for that, because everybody would be pricing at that higher standard. The entire benchmark would be lifted to a much greater level. And then if you're tendering for a piece of land and you're looking at your build costs and your profit, you're obviously going to have to pay less for the piece of land for that to stack up. Do you see what I mean? Now, that might not always work, because it's a free market. It's not a cartel. And if it's a free market, then someone could just outbid you. But then they're probably going to make less of a profit, because they're going to have to spend more money per square foot on the build. Do you see what I mean? Now, that's why, if I'm honest, I think there needs to be a different model, a different way of doing it. We need to, just like some companies have now got a corporate responsibility about recycling the products they make, I wonder whether the house builders should have a social responsibility to be made to take a long-term view. on projects, and I'm not sure they should be allowed to just sell and make a big profit and move on, and that we actually change the way that they're structured. Now that would have to be legislated for, because they're not going to choose to do that, and that's tricky. It's not easy. And I'm just kind of putting thoughts out there, if I'm honest with you. But I do think that the model needs to change if you're going to have a long-term view. What that model is, it's not my job really to answer that, to be honest with you. But we've got to do it. You know, I mean, it's not like we should do it just because a target's been set, or because it's now the trendy thing to do at the minute because everyone's talking about it. I mean, you know, David Attenborough is like my superhero. You know what I mean? And the guy's just amazing. And he is genuinely, and he's a positive guy, but he is genuinely depressed about the state that we've got ourselves into. He really is. I met him and I was talking to him about it. He can't believe the rate of damage that we're causing. It's unbelievable. And if you think about it, in the time that we live in, well, let's say the last 130 years, just to throw a few things out there. You know, the first flight was in 1903. It's not that long ago, in the big scheme of things, 1903. And then by 1969, we were on the moon. I mean, that is amazing, isn't it, really? I mean, that is staggering. And at any one time, there's 20,000 aeroplanes in the sky, right? At any one time. You know, when the car was invented, it wasn't really that long ago, to be honest. And obviously it was made a lot more popular and accessible in the 1920s. And the same, we've now got something like 3.5 billion cars on the road at any one time. I mean, it still amazes me when I hear about the numbers of how many barrels of oil are produced a day. You know, it's like something, I can't remember what it is, but I think it's like 45 million barrels a day, global. That's a shitload of oil, isn't it? I can't even imagine what that looks like in terms of the number of barrels. And it's every day. I mean, that's mind-boggling, really. And so in the last 150 years, obviously we live very good lives. I think we're incredibly fortunate. We're all living longer and we're all healthier, and we have got better diets. You know, we might whinge about certain foods, but we certainly eat a lot better. And we've really benefited from that, but it's come at a massive cost, I think. And I think we've had such a massive change since the Industrial Revolution that we do genuinely need to have an ecological revolution, I think. And it's not just about stopping the damage, it's actually about reversing it. So one thing that I'm working on it at the minute in housing, if I can get it away, then I'll be very happy. But it's also, it's about actually enhancing the environment. So taking brownfield sites and really transforming them, not just bringing them back into use, but actually making them kind of nature positive and thinking about how we can make what was an industrial brownfield site into something that's staggeringly green, like really green. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's the stuff that we've got to do. I'm working ridiculously hard on that. We set up a new business to do it, basically. I might not pull it off. I might be bankrupt in 2 years' time, but I'd prefer to fail and try than not try at all.
It was a long answer, wasn't it? But a good one, I think. Okay, I'm going to give you a chance to catch your breath, have some water. No, it's good, it's good, it's good. So let's talk about the road to net zero. So the targets have been changed, as we know. UK, instead of being 80% emission drop, whatever, we're now net zero for 2050. So we've got this road. For those of you who saw the presentation this morning, I took numbers out the report from the Committee for Climate Change, and they're basically saying in order for us to achieve net zero, we have to have by 2050 19 million heat pumps attached to homes. The rest of the homes should be either low carbon, to be defined, or some form of renewable heating. If you dig further into that report, the rate of replace, so they've got this vision of this low carbon grid. So at the moment, if you look back at what we've done over the past 10 years, power generation's done so much better than every single other sector. Construction, frankly, has been pretty poor in going low carbon. I think it's what you were saying, George, in terms of we are terrible at self-regulation. We have to be hit with a stick or threatened, perhaps, with the end of the world. I don't know. But anyway, on the road to net zero. Yeah. or you decide to change. Yeah, I'll hand this over 1 second. Yeah. Okay. So the question is, George, on the road to net zero, retrofit property. We spoke about new build, retrofit property. So the CCC say we've got to essentially multiply our offshore wind by 7 times, onshore wind double, PV by about 10 times, increase our land mass of forest from 9% to 14%, and a load of other stuff, which we can go on and on about. But reading one of your last blogs, you state that less than 1% of our housing stock is actually renewed each year in terms of new build, which, simple maths, 300,000 homes, we've got 28 million homes. So the big question is what we do in terms of the retrofit market, which I think is probably an even bigger challenge.
I think it's the biggest, actually. I mean, new build in some ways, I mean, I'm not going to say it's easy, but if we got our act together, it's pretty straightforward. It's not rocket science, to be perfectly honest with you. To build an ecological new build house is not hard. Right? It might cost a bit more money, of course it would, but if you're going to be saving on your energy bills and doing the right thing, that's a straightforward thing to do. Retrofit is really tough. It's really, really, really difficult. You've got all different forms of tenure. What's going to incentivise someone who's a homeowner to do it? Obviously, I can understand why someone who's in a housing association property might want to do it because they're going to invest in their stock and renew it. And to be honest with you, it's constant renewal, isn't it? I mean, we're talking about air source heat pumps and everything else as if they're like the smart, techie, cool new thing, but they need to be upgraded and changed at some point. We always have to do that. You just do. You've got to do it. You have to do it. Now, you could argue that there's been a massive underinvestment in our existing housing stock. Of course there has. Sometimes when there is investment, like at Grenfell, it goes horribly wrong. So it's got to be done in the right way, and it's got to be done properly. But it's bloody hard. If you want to go in and dry line the internal wall of somebody's house, you're taking off skirting boards, you're taking off architraves on external doors. You probably have to take the window frames off. I mean, you don't necessarily have to do all of that, but you've certainly got to take skirtings off and picture rails and dado rails. It's all going to come off. I mean, that's a hell of a job. A hell of a job. Obviously, you get insulated from the outside, which is happening quite a lot. So you're getting brick buildings, which are now looking like rendered buildings, because we wrap them with insulation and then we render on the outside, and that's actually working really well. To be honest, that's not a bad way of doing it. Still not easy though. Still not easy, because if you haven't got a deep overhang on your roof, it starts looking really weird, and you've got to start extending the fascia board to the barge boards, and you've got to change your guttering. And do you know what I mean? It's tough actually. But we could start with some of the really simple stuff, like getting rid of your boiler. I mean, I now talk about getting rid of the boiler, not because I'm a Mitsubishi ambassador, no, but genuinely, but I remember 10 years ago I was just talking about upgrading your boiler, so taking your old one out, because if it's been there for 10, if you've got a boiler that's been there for 15 years, it will probably still work, but it'll be a bit, to be honest with you, it's going to be pretty inefficient, but we hang on in there, don't we? We hang on in there until it dies. We don't even really get them serviced. You have to as a landlord, but I did a campaign 10 years ago about MOTing your home and saying you should get your gas boiler checked and serviced every single year just to keep on top of it and so it's safe. We don't. I mean, how many, honestly, put your hand up if you service your boiler. I don't have one now. Do you service your boiler every year? I'm impressed. That's the most hands I've seen probably in any crowd. But, yeah. What was that? By the same person that did it 15 years ago. I like that. That's good. So the conversation has changed, but retrofit is really difficult, and it's very disruptive, and it can be quite expensive. But you've just got to try and do the simple things well. I mean, single glazing and double glazing, obvious, isn't it? It's a complete no-brainer. We should have been doing that years ago. We should be doing triple glazing. They were doing triple glazing in Sweden in the 1970s when we were thinking about double glazing. Do you know what I mean? So there are simple upgrades that you can do that would make a big difference. But if you were talking about upgrading an existing Victorian terraced house to be anywhere near low carbon, that is a substantial amount of work. I'm not saying you can't do it, but it's a big, disruptive, messy bit of work to do. So I don't know how we do it, if I'm really honest with you. I just don't know how you do that. It would take a big commitment. or you'd have to have massive incentives, which I just don't think the Treasury would pay for at the minute.
Great, thank you, George. We're going to go on to a last subject, and then we've probably got a couple of questions, time for a couple of questions. So a subject very close to your heart, which kind of ties in more with the new build, and you came to our offices last year. We hosted a day called Transforming the Housing Technology Mindset. We're repeating that again in Manchester on the 25th. Anyone who specifies or consults on heating systems or build, register on our website. And we were talking about various sustainability things, such as building fabric, and we had a couple of speakers on modern methods of construction, much more modular, and the benefits of modular compared to standard. George did a great presentation of basically how our methods are currently. So I just wanted your views on well, a couple of things. Moby, not the speaker, singer. Yeah, Moby, and modern methods of construction, how you see that potentially helping us solve the housing crisis and the carbon crisis.
So I set up an educational charity 2 years ago called MOBIE, M-O-B-I-E, which is the Ministry of Building, Innovation and Education. I had to add the E on the end because Moby the singer had protected the Moby brand even for education, so I wasn't allowed to use that. He would have sued me. So I added the E on the end to get around it. But it is an educational charity. The reason why we've done it is because I think a lot of the educational systems at the minute aren't necessarily open enough or open-minded enough or creative enough to allow young kids to really think and express themselves in terms of design. You know, like CDT has been taken off the national curriculum now, and kids aren't making stuff as much anymore. And we do a number of different things. We basically use the home as a vehicle for kids to be thinking about all aspects of what I regard as built environment and design. Most of us can we can relate to homes if we're lucky enough to have one. And so it's an easy, accessible way for kids to kind of redesign their bedrooms or redesign their mum and dad's house or speculate about the house that they might want to live in. Everything I do is about homes and housing anyway, not just on television, but my business is all homes and housing. It's all I've really done, to be honest, once I set my new practice up. That was in 2000. Before that I worked on big infrastructure projects for big practices, doing railway stations and stuff, but I never felt any emotional connection to those projects, where I think kind of home is such a kind of, it's a very emotional piece of architecture, isn't it? It's like an extended member of your family, really. I bet you if I asked you to close your eyes and tell me about your mum and dad's house, or the house you grew up in, you'd probably be able to tell me pretty much everything. Do you know what I mean? You'd probably be able, if I made you do it, you'd probably be able to remember how many steps there were on the staircase. Do you know what I mean? You'd probably do 4 or 5, and then you might turn and go down another couple. It's amazing how much, even if you're not an architect or a designer in the property industry, it's amazing how much you understand that environment and how much you read it. You know, things like smell and you know, I remember which floorboard squeaked on the staircase because I'd have to step over it on Christmas morning to try when I was sneaking down to see what presents I'd got. I knew which one did it, and I'd always step over that one on the stairs so my mum and dad wouldn't wake up. And I think it's such a powerful piece of architecture, and it is architecture. You know, even if you live in what might be the most ordinary house in the world, might be the most ordinary thing ever, that to me is the most important piece of architecture in your life, and that makes it really special. And so I just thought, well, that's a gift, isn't it, really? That's win-win. If I can inspire young kids to want to design homes in a really innovative way, in quite a free way, then I think I'm hoping, over the long term, because it's a long-term strategy, because I'm thinking like for the rest of my days I'll do this. Hopefully I've got a few more. That it'll start to change the industry from the bottom up, because I don't think we'll change it from the top down. If I'm really honest, I think it'll be a bottom-up change. And the conversations that I have with the kids in our Moby courses is just amazing. You know, it's a whole different level of conversation about how they want to live and what they want spaces to be like and what they want things to be made out of. It's amazing when you get a 12-year-old kid coming up to you and saying, so what's that made out of? And it's a bit of plywood, you know, and they're going, well, where's that come from? And I'm like, Germany. Why's it coming from Germany? Why is it doing so many air miles? You know, it's like, honestly, it's amazing. It's fantastic, you know. And we're doing some things above the radar and being very official and professional. So we've got further education courses, BTEC and advanced building construction. We've got higher education, MSc courses in advanced home futures. We've just launched a PhD program for 6 PhD students with the University of Northumbria. We're working at multiple universities and colleges around the country. But the bit that I love is the under the radar bit, because I can't get Moby on the national curriculum, right? Government would never have it. And I don't want it to be on the national curriculum because then it would just become really boring and they'd ruin it. And so instead we set Moby design challenges, and it's extracurricular. Yeah? So kids have got to do it on nights and weekends, or if you get really good teachers at school who buy into it, they get them to do it in their lunch hour, or they'll stay behind after school and work on it. And so we'll invite a number of schools to go in for one of our Moby competitions. We'll set a challenge, and it might be modular housing for first-time buyers. It might be a multi-generational home. It might be design a house that looks like a tree house but's a real house. If Mother Nature was an architect, how would she design a house? You know, we set all of these like quite nuts projects, to be honest with you. And then the projects that come out from mainly the 14 to 16-year-olds are amazing. So the first ever Moby Design Challenge we did, we didn't judge it on categories. So it wasn't like, that's the 14 to 16-year-old category and that's the 16 to 18-year-old. We went, no, you're all being judged the same. Yeah, no preferential treatment. We are judging you all the same. Even if you're a university student, all the same. And who won? A 14-year-old girls' school from Nottingham. And do you know why they won? Because they hadn't been contaminated by a conventional teaching system, an educational system. So the 16 to 18-year-olds, and I don't mean to disrespect them because they did some lovely schemes, but they were just taking these were BTEC construction students as well, you know. They were just taking like standard CAD templates and just dropping them into a model. And you were looking at the house just thinking, that's just loads of standard bits of kit that you found in your symbols library. You know, it wasn't like rethinking what home would be. And then the 14-year-old girls' school not only built the most beautiful Revit model, I mean, I can't do Revit, I've got a clue. Yeah, built this beautiful model. They'd come up with a brand and a company name, and they just based their entire housing scheme, their modular housing scheme, on the same similar structure as a beehive, on hexagons. So they called their company Hexa Homes. Yeah. And they'd really thought about everything. So the hexagon shape, which had like the bathroom in, that even worked out how you would hang the mirror in the bathroom, because if you stuck it on the wall it would be at the wrong angle and you'd be looking at your feet. And they designed these like clever little arms so that you could pivot it. They're taking like the arm off the old iMac computer, you know, the one that used to twist the screen around, and done all that. And it was an absolute joy to see that. And when we ran the first one, I thought, now I know we're doing the right thing. Because you're always scared when you start something. Is it really going to take off? And it's just flying now. We do multiple design challenges every year, working with all sorts of different organisations, and it's just brilliant. And I'm just hoping that we can create the next generation of developers and house builders and architects who actually really, really, really want to do something unique with homes, because we're not really doing it at the minute. I don't think I answered the whole question, did I? I just talked about Moby a little bit. But it is phenomenal. You just have a completely different conversation with these kids. It's brilliant. The reason I'll do this until I'm 80 is I'm hoping it'll keep me young. Do you know what I mean? Because they're just amazing. They're constant. Why are we doing it like that? Why are we doing? I love that questioning. And for Moby, there's no right answer. So they're not being judged. You know, they're not being marked. They're not being. You know, they're not having to do all of these things. We just set them this open brief and go, you go and do it. Question it. Turn it on its head if you want. Flip the brief on its head if you don't like the brief. Just do what you think is the right thing for you to do. They go for it.
Fantastic.
I started it in May 2017. Yeah, thanks. I started in May 2017, and it's the best thing I've ever done.
Fantastic. Thanks, George.